It's the beginning of 2024, the first meeting of Monday night and of the APT program. FYI, in general, at A to Z, we keep our cameras on during this time. And doing meditation, sometimes you put it off. Because we are practicing relating to each other. I will also say, since it's the beginning of the year, that just a reminder that we are taking attendance. This is true of the app program and for A to Z in general. And part of the reason is when events are limited in number, then people who are the most consistent get first dibs to attend. For instance, the 5-day in May that's coming up, or if we have any other event that come up, perhaps Sangha week somewhere or something, then that's how we determine. And so that's partly why we do attendance. Ryogen takes attendance. Ryogen, like the Chico, will take attendance for tonight. At the other events for APT, I'll be asking you to be part of the attendance taking. We'll deal with that, say, on Wednesday. All right. I want to start out by welcoming everyone and saying I am very excited about the program. And really, well, like 4 of you on here are not in the app programs. So in general, everyone is in the app program. And I did encourage everyone in the Sangha to take app because I think it will actually support us to deepen our practice, as we will be bringing more awareness, or the program will support you to bring more awareness to the what, where, how, when, which. What am I missing? Anything else about your awareness or your attention? That's the idea. And as I've said before, with all honesty, I don't know what it is exactly. I have a sense and I have some ideas, and I am making it up as we go along, which, by the way, is what happens anyway. So, yeah, so we're doing it all together. All right. For tonight, I want to talk about, I want to start out, as many of you know, in the app program, the 3-year, roughly, I say it's what do I say? Here it is. Where is it? Here, from the Genjo Koan. To study the Buddha way is to study the self. To study the self is to forget the self. To forget the self is to be actualized by mirrored things. Right? So that comes from the Genjo Koan. As all things are Buddha Dharma, there's delusion and realization, practice, birth and death, and there are Buddhas and sentient beings. As the mirrored things are without an abiding self, there's no delusion, no realization, no Buddha, no sentient beings, no birth or death. The Buddha way is basically leaping clear of the many and the one. Thus, there are birth and death, delusion and realization, sentient beings and Buddhas. Yet in attachment, blossoms fall, and in aversion, weeds spread. To carry yourself forward and experience mirror things is delusion. That mirror things come forth and experience themselves is awakening. Those who have great realization of delusion are Buddhas. Those who are greatly deluded about realization are sentient beings. Further, there are those who continue realizing beyond realization, who are in delusion throughout delusion. When Buddhas are truly Buddhas, they do not necessarily notice that they are Buddhas. However, they are actualized Buddhas who go on actualizing Buddhas. When you see form or hear sounds fully engaging body and mind, you grasp things directly. Unlike things and their reflections in the mirror, and unlike the moon and its reflection in the water, when one side is illuminated, the other side is dark. To study the Buddha way is to study the self. To study the self is to forget the self. To forget the self is to be actualized by mere things. When actualized by mere things, your body and mind are, as well as the bodies and minds of others, drop away. No trace of realization remains, and this no trace continues endlessly. When you first seek Dharma, you realize you are far away from its environs. But Dharmas are already correctly transmitted. You are immediately your original self. All right. So it goes on, but I wanted to start by the name Genjo Koan. Now, those of you who have some sense of practice have heard about koans, and many people think of koans as paradoxes and as a koan practice. Koans are technically, historically, in China, where koan practice developed first. It's actually, a koan is a recording of a public case, like in court. That's what it actually means. However, according to Tig and Leighton, this koan here doesn't actually mean that. It's not really about, so we think of Genjo Koan, you might think, oh, it's a koan about whatever Genjo is. Yet this koan here actually means to be in the heart. Koan here refers to teaching stories, but not to teaching stories, but to the heart of the matter. And Genjo means fully or completely manifest, or to express and share. Therefore, Genjo Koan, a translation of Genjo Koan, is the actualization of the fundamental point. The actualization of the fundamental point, or sometimes the actualization of reality, which makes a good beginning. And the Genjo Koan is considered actually one of the foremost writings of Dogen Zenji, or Eihei Dogen, who is the founder of Soto Zen in our lineage, of course. So I wanted to start out with Suzuki Roshi, in a lecture in 1966, said, "Most of you are beginners. So it may be rather difficult for you to understand why we practice zazen, or meditation, in this way. We always say just to sit, or just sitting, which is what I gave you as the simple instruction during meditation." Back to Suzuki Roshi. We always say just to sit. And if you do, you will find out that Zen practice just to sit is not easy. Just to sit may be the most difficult thing. To work on something is not difficult. How to not work on anything is rather difficult. I'm going to repeat that. To work on something is not difficult. How to not work on anything is rather difficult. This is the fundamental point of Zazen. This is me now, right? Back to Suzuki Roshi. When we have the idea of self, we want some reason why we work on something. But if you do not have the idea of self, you can remain silent and calm, whether or not you work on something. You will not lose your composure. So to remain silent and calm is a kind of test we receive. So to remain silent and calm is a kind of test we receive. Every word of that. So to remain silent and calm is a kind of test we receive. If you can do it, it means you have no idea of self. If your life is based on the usual idea of self, what you will do will not be successful in its true sense. There will be success in one way, but in another way, you are digging your own grave. No pulling punches here, folks. So to work without the idea of self is a very, very important point. It is much more important than making a good decision. Even a good decision based on a one-sided idea of self will create difficulties for yourself and others. So then we can see how this, to study the self, right, is to forget the self or to go beyond the self. To forget the self, let's see if I can highlight this and copy it. So the version you have is to study the Buddha way is to study the self. So we could say that this is what we're doing as Buddhism, and it is the broad stroke of Buddhism. Buddhism, broad stroke, is that it is a practice in which it is a practice of self-examination, of this being right here and right now. To study the self is to forget the self. Now, most of us, when we hear this in this version, which is, kind of typical, things that means, oh, I have to let go of being selfish. And there is a lot of talk about that in a lot of teaching on Buddhism. It really means that another way that Suzuki Roshi has talked about it is to study ourselves, is to go beyond ourselves. So I appreciate that, because it means that it's not that you just forget the self because we're selfish. We just say, what else is here besides the way that this self is perceiving it, is doing things with it? What else is here besides what I think it is, right? So beyond here doesn't mean we forget the self, but we want to remember to forget ourselves, because we tend to think that reality is based on our own perception only. That's just the way we're made up, as you will find out when you take 2.0 more, okay? To forget the self is to be actualized by mirrored things. Right? Another version, so you can say forget is to go beyond. To go beyond ourselves is to be enlightened by all things. Now, it's a very common thing that I talk about all the time, right? There's that part where it says to think just above that, where it says, to carry yourself forward and experience mirrored things is delusion. That mirrored things come forth and experience themselves is awakening. We let go of just our own perception. We don't forget it, but we want to let go of the solidifying, the grasping onto it as the only truth, or the truth that everyone else should follow, so that we let the mirrored things inform us, right? The mirrored things can include other ways that we experience things, our emotions being different than what we think. On one level, the practice is to identify clearly what is going on, right? And sensation and emotions and thought. But it's to identify it, is not to necessarily say this is how it is all the time. We also need to remember that it can be different. Right? My anger is like this, and it's good to notice when your anger is like that. And then you go, oh, but what else is here besides this way of seeing my anger, or my frustration, or my lack of self-worth, or whatever it is, or their frustration, or their way of X, Y, or Z. When actualized by mirrored things, your body and mind, as well as the body and minds of others, drop away. No trace of realization remains. and this no trace continues endlessly. Now, this part is a little bit harder because it says, wow, what does that mean that body and minds drop away? Your body and mind, as well as bodies and minds of other, drop away. No trace of realization remain, and this no trace continues endlessly. So I'm going to go back to Taigen when he talks. It's Taigen Liēn, by the way, who does a lot of translation with Shohaku Okumura. He's a scholar. He's from our lineage. He's a scholar. And he says in a talk he gave about these two lines in 2006. Usually Zen students, when they hear, to study the Buddha way is to study the self, to study the self is to forget the self, they think that they are supposed to forget the self. But actually, our practice is just to study the self. Studying the self is exactly forgetting the self. This is a practice just to be the person on your cushion right now in this body and mind. Because usually when you think of a self, you think of all the things it should or shouldn't be, right? This is the self that comes up. And when it's a self that comes up that you like, then you go, oh, how can I keep it more? Or how can I be this way? Oh, my body feels relaxed right now. How do I keep it? When it doesn't, then you want to change it. And yet we're practicing to meet reality as it is. That's the fundamental point of not just Zazen, but really practice. All the other ways are tools for how to manage, how to cope, how to help ourselves so that we can be with things as they are. Which doesn't mean we don't do things to make things be different. Like if your leg is hurting and there's a sharp pain, then you should move, right? It's not saying don't do things. It's saying, when is it that we do things when we don't need to do things, right? The not doing is the harder part. We mostly just want to fix all the time, right? How many of you are in relationship are just like, you're so much of a relation. Oh, sorry. I have more to my question. Oh, great that you're in a relationship. Well, actually, all of you should be raising your hands because you're all in relationship. We're all in relationship right now. Okay. And how many of you in relationship, so much of it is about like how much the other person tries too hard to manage you or your life, or tries not hard enough to manage you or your life. Like, throughout the day, not make, hopefully, I don't know, actually, I won't say. Maybe it's the bigger thing of your relationship, or maybe it's just a little thing. But at least in my experience, almost every day, one of those things come up, right? Not just of my primary relationship, but something, right? Relationship with the weather, right? That's one, right? That the mirrored things, by the way, is more than just human beings, right? The mirrored things is all phenomena. This is why when you start to think, this is why it's such an important writing, because most of us don't forget that everything right now, what I want to control and get up and do is what I want it to be warm all day. Now I'm hot, right? So I want to go change that. And yet, can I just sit here and be with warmth? So I'll continue here from Taigen. We really fully just Genjo Koan this person here. He used it as a verb. Really look at the delusion and the awakening happening on your cushion or chair right now. That is forgetting the self. I'm going to read that again. Really look at the delusion and the awakening happening on your cushion or chair right now. That is forgetting the self. There's a story about a very powerful sesshin or meditation retreat in which there were both Americans and also some Asian people present. He did practice in Japan, so I'm not quite sure where this is. I forget who this is back to type. I forget who the teacher was, but at the end he asked, well, how was this session? And everybody said, oh, it was wonderful. This was a wonderful retreat. And all the Westerners were saying, I really feel fulfilled. I really feel like I have realized myself. I feel so much better about myself. And then the Asians said, oh, we had a wonderful session, but I felt how much I appreciated everybody else. I felt my gratitude. I felt how selfish I have been and how much I want to change myself. These are two different ways of looking at the self, both a part of studying the self. Now, even hearing that, how many of you are going, well, that's true, no, that's not true, right? How do we meet phenomena, in this case, me reading these words, and just receiving them as how Taigen is sharing a way to understand that we can have different perspectives. And at times, sure, we generalize. I myself read it and thought, oh, well, you know, I can see similarities, right, in both. You continue. This study of the self is not about psychologically analyzing ourself. That might be part of it, and psychology and psychotherapy can be complementary and helpful to Zen students. But the practice that we do, sitting upright, observing this body and mind from within our body and mind, not from some idea of it, goes much deeper than just our physiological analyses. It may include those, but it is about how it is to actually be present in this body and mind to really feel that. This is our work. This is the ongoing awakening beyond awakening. Don't forget that in Mahayana Buddhism, which Zen is part of, you are already awakened. Everything you want is already present. It's likely not present in necessarily the way you want or in a constant way, but it is available. It is possible. Part of our practice is to realize how we meet that. How do we keep ourselves away from what we're looking for? How do we keep ourselves away from reality? For instance, again, if we're angry, when I'm angry, I know that when I'm angry at someone and I don't want to be angry, I actually get more frustrated about how I shouldn't be angry. See, so that's not being with anger. That's being with my idea of a self that has an idea about me and anger. And so what is it to then be with anger as it is? The sensation, the emotions, the thoughts, to observe the consequences of those. When you first seek Dharma, you imagine you are far away from its environs. But Dharma is already correctly transmitted You are immediately your original self. Suzuki Roshi says, when you say, I attain enlightenment, you are far away from the direct experience of enlightenment. When we discover the truth is already being correctly or inherently transmitted to us, we are ourselves at the moment of enlightenment. This is not a matter of effort or practice anymore. Our practice is not just effort, or he laughs. Our practice is you come here and study or practice Zazen so that you understand what is Buddhism. I think so, he laughs. And he laughs again, I'm making effort to give you some understanding of Zen. That is true. That is actually what we're doing here. And he laughs again. But I shall be very much disappointed if you do not come when you think. I know what is. Now I know what is Buddhism. He laughs. So there will not be no need to practice Zazen to study Zen. That's when I'll be very disappointed. I want you to come here even though you understand what is Buddhism. He laughs. I am not selling you something. And he laughs hilariously, I guess. But I want you to be my customer. More hilarious laughing. I am not selling you something, but I want you to be my customer. I could say that. I am not selling you anything, but I want you to be my customer. I am not going to give you any instruction. I'm not going to teach you anything. Doing app on Monday nights, anytime I open my mouth, I am not teaching you anything. But I want you to listen and take it in. Why? Well, let me finish with him first. And I want to live with your support, and I think I shall be very glad if you have some joy in practicing with us here. That is actually Buddhism. It is not a matter of, he laughs, enlightenment or understanding. So we come, and as I said this already, and this is why you're asked to take 1.0 and 2.0 again. Many of you have taken it already. And many things I will say, you'll be like, oh God, she says that almost every time we have a meeting, or at least once a month. Because it isn't the information that I'm going to give you. It is what you're going to do with it. I'm here to try to support you to see different ways of being with it, to get closer to it, to see where you get in the way of being with phenomena, reality as it is, for you to actualize the fundamental point. But I can't do it for you. And that's why you have to put in effort. He has a really fun analogy here, Suzuki Roshi. He says, it's like pressing your pants. You can't just, or he says dress, and then he talks about pants, right? This is 1960 or something, right? He says, like when you want to press your pants, you don't just fold it into, the crease. You have to take an iron and really press. So you have to make effort. To get pressed pants, you can't just put it into that shape. To have practice, you can't just put it into a shape. You do have to make effort. If possible, you should put something on it, even after you put iron. This kind of effort is necessary, But when this kind of effort is forced on you, that does not work. This kind of effort should be continued without effort, with mutual encouragement. In this way, our practice will be continued. So I'm here to say, I have this iron, and I would like us to press these pants like this, or a handkerchief like this. But then there's mutual encouragement for pressing. So this is why it takes interaction. This is why I asked you to come on and show up fully here. This is different than our usual things where we say, hey, I signed up for this, but I also need to, clip my toenails or whatever at the same time. Be here completely, because this is a mutual interaction. We're in relationship with each other constantly. I'm going to end here with actually there's a whole book, Shaku Kimura, on realizing Genjo Koan, which was when I was Shusou, we studied. And at the end of the chapter on the meaning of Genjo Koan, he says, in my understanding, this teaching of individuality and universality is the essence of the title Genjo Koan. Genjo is nothing other than Koan, and Koan is nothing other than Genjo. Genjo means reality actually and presently taking place. And Koan means absolute truth that embraces relative truth. Or, this is another meaning of Koan, a question that true reality asks of us. So Koan means two things: absolute truth that embraces relative truth, or a question that true reality asks of us. So notice there's a mutuality there. Right? There is always absolute truth. It embraces our relative individuality, and it's a question that reality is always asking of us. And mostly reality is asking us what? To be present. So we can say that Genjo Koan means to answer the question from true reality through the practice of our everyday activity. So act, or our practice, is to answer the question from true reality through the practice of our everyday activity. Nice little summary, huh?